So, hello friends, and welcome to today's Sutta class. We will start as usual with the Namo Tassa. Feel free to join in if you like. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, hello and welcome everyone to our Sutta class. Today, I thought we could talk a little bit about the 5 hindrances. So, the 5 hindrances, obviously, I think most of you will be familiar with. These are obstacles that can arise in meditation and that can sort of block our pathway into samadhi and block our pathway into the development of the higher stages on the path. And so I don't know if you have noticed, but over the course of the last few weeks or the last few months, maybe every time that we finish the sutta and there's question and answer at the end, there's always a question: how do I overcome the 5 hindrances? Or how do I overcome one of the 5 hindrances? And no matter what topic we are discussing, almost every single time there was such a question. And usually, because it was off topic, I always just replied very briefly. And so I thought that maybe today we should take this as an opportunity to really dive more deeply into the 5 hindrances and really just dedicate one session to just talking about them. Maybe 1 or 2 sessions. Let's see how it goes. And really just have a look how they arise, what they are, how they arise, and how we can overcome them. So the 5 hindrances, of course, I think most people will know them. The first one is sensual desire. The second one is ill will. And then there's sloth and torpor. That is Bhikkhu Buddhist translations. Other people have translated, for example, as laziness and sleepiness. So being very low energy, being very tired and sleepy and lazy and so on. Then the 4th hindrance is restlessness and remorse, sometimes also translated as agitation. And then the last one is doubt, and not just any random kind of doubt, such as doubt whether or not the bus will be on time today or whatever, but doubt specifically about things relating to Buddhism. So doubt in the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, for example, doubt if the Buddha was really fully enlightened, or doubt if the Dhamma is really true, and if the Noble Eightfold Path really works, and if we can actually reach Nibbana and things like that, or doubt in our own abilities to practice. So maybe you think that other people can practice and other people can become enlightened, but you're not qualified, you're not good enough, or your meditation isn't going good enough. Or maybe you think you don't have the right meditation method, or you haven't met the right teacher. So doubt that really sort of undermines our faith in the practice and our faith in the Triple Gem. And that will, because there is all this doubt, it will block off our path, because we don't really commit to the path. We constantly second guess ourselves, and for that reason, we don't give it our full commitment, and for that reason, we don't really properly make progress on the path. So for that reason, doubt is the last of the 5 hindrances. And as you have probably noticed, is that the first and the second hindrance, this is a pair of opposites, and also the 3rd and the 4th hindrance, again, is a pair of opposites, and the last one is by itself without a counterpart. So the first one, sensual desire, is the opposite of ill will. So sensual desire, of course, is being attracted to objects or to people, or even to just notions and ideas and viewpoints in our mind. So this attraction to something that we think is pleasurable, something that we like, that is sensual desire. So because something is pleasant and we like it, we create a lot of craving in our mind. And because of the craving, we create a lot of attachment, and we sort of fetter ourselves to samsara. So the our bondage, our fetters that bind us to this round of rebirth increase, and our mental defilements increase, and our mind isn't clear and pure and still. And so for that reason, we can't really go deeply into samadhi, into sort of deep states of meditation. And so the opposite of sensual desire is ill will. So ill will is the repulsion when we come into contact with unpleasant objects. So exactly the opposite of sensual desire. So when there is an unpleasant object, then we sort of want to push it away. We don't want to have it there. We sort of have a lot of anger in our mind because we are in contact with this unpleasant thing, or even like more than anger, even rage or hatred, or even something very subtle such as just a mild irritation. All this comes under this second hindrance of ill will. And so whenever there's an unpleasant object or an unpleasant person or an unpleasant thought in our mind, if we are not mindful, if we just habitually react to that, then we increase this hindrance, we increase this defilement. And again, just like with sensual desire, whether we are actually attracted to something or whether we are repulsed by something, in each case, we just create more sort of defilements. We create more of these habit patterns that bind us to samsara and that make our mind agitated. So even though those two are actually opposites, in some way they're also very similar, because in each and every case, we create a lot of unwholesome states and we sort of increase our suffering. And then the third and the fourth hindrance, as I mentioned, this is also a pair of opposites. So sloth and torpor, or laziness and sleepiness, is when we have very low energy, when we can't really practice because we don't really want to focus on anything. We're just way too lazy to even try to meditate, or even if we sit down, the mind just is too foggy and we can't really focus on our meditation object. So being low energy, not having enough energy for practice, is the third hindrance. And then the fourth hindrance is exactly the opposite, being very restless, being very agitated, having way too much energy. The mind is just constantly jumping from one thing to the next. And it's impossible to settle down on one meditation object. And so it's impossible for the mind to calm down and to become peaceful. And so this can happen, of course, in our meditation practice, but hindrances obviously can also arise in our daily life and can prevent us from practicing wholesome states in our daily life. So even in our daily life, we can be very lazy, we can procrastinate a lot, we can't really, get ourselves to do things that are wholesome. So maybe we think, it would be really good if we, I don't know, like in worldly terms, if we studied for an exam, or if we did some kind of work, or even if we want to practice Buddhism, if we cultivated some wholesome states, if we went to the monastery and gave some dana, or if we read this Buddhist book, or if we studied some more, something like that. But because that hindrance is present, so even in our daily life, not just in meditation, this can really sort of prevent us from making progress on the path. And also with the hindrance of restlessness, this can also happen on our meditation, but also can happen in daily life. Maybe we're just constantly rushing around and trying to multitask with like 100 different things at the same time. And the mind is just constantly all over the place and constantly so busy with like a million things. And if we cultivate this kind of lifestyle in our daily life, then obviously this will spill over into our meditation. And we'll have a really hard time because we have just cultivated this hindrance the whole day. So obviously when we sit down for meditation, that hindrance will be all over our mind and we will not be able to focus and to settle down. So hindrances sort of block our meditation, but they also cause a lot of problems in our daily life. And it really matters what we do in our daily life. That really impacts the way how we are able to meditate. So now that we have recapped the 5 hindrances, I think we can start with our sutta for today. This sutta is from the Samyutta Nikaya 46.51. This sutta is called Nutriment, and it is not one of the famous suttas, so I think maybe it's not that well known. Maybe for some of you, this will be the first time that you read this sutta. So I thought we could have a look at it today. And this sutta talks about the 5 hindrances and also about the 7 bojjhangas, the 7 enlightenment factors. But because today we want to focus on the 5 hindrances, we're going to skip all the passages that talk about the 7 enlightenment factors, and we will just read the part about the 5 hindrances. And so I have put a link in the live chat to Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. I will also be reading from Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. So if you want to follow along, then you can just follow that link. And the sutta begins at Savatthi, and the Buddha says, "Bhikkhus, I will teach you the nutriment and the de-nourishment in regard to the 5 hindrances and the 7 factors of enlightenment. Listen to that and attend closely to what I shall say." "Yes, Venerable Sir," the bhikkhus replied, and the Buddha said this. So the Buddha begins this sutta by telling the bhikkhus that he will teach about the nutriment and the de-nourishment in regard to the 5 hindrances. So the nutriment means that there are various factors or various practices, various habits that we can cultivate, various actions that we can do. And if we do them, then we feed into the 5 hindrances. So we provide nourishment for those 5 hindrances. We kind of strengthen them, we make them increase and grow and develop. So all this obviously is very unskillful behavior because we don't want to increase our hindrances. We actually want to decrease and eventually dissolve those 5 hindrances. But in order to be able to dissolve them, first of all, we have to understand what we are doing wrong the whole time and why those hindrances are there, because we have been feeding them the whole time. So first of all, we need to see all the unskillful habits that we have. So this is what the Buddha teaches about first. So we need to understand what's going on. And then obviously, once we understand our mistake, we can stop doing that. So this is the first part of the sutta, teaching us about this unskillful side of things, how we nourish the 5 hindrances. And then, of course, the Buddha will also talk about the de-nourishment of those 5 hindrances. So how we can stop feeding into those hindrances, how we can sort of make them decrease, how we can sort of calm them down, quieten them down, and eventually completely let go and completely dissolve them so that our mind becomes completely pure and still, and we can enter into deep states of samadhi and, develop really deep wisdom and insight. Because when the mind is very clear and very still, obviously it's much easier to see into the mind and to sort of understand how the mind works and make insights into those very profound insights into the nature of reality that will enable us to make breakthroughs to higher stages on the path. So this is what the sutta is about, the nutriment and the de-nourishment of the 5 hindrances. But first of all, the nutriments for the 5 hindrances. And here the Buddha says, "And what, bhikkhus, is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen sensual desire, and for the increase and expansion of arisen sensual desire? There is, bhikkhus, the sign of the beautiful. Frequently giving careless attention to it is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen sensual desire, and for the increase and expansion of arisen sensual desire." So the Buddha starts off with the first hindrance, sensual desire. And he says, well, because we frequently pay careless attention to things that we think are very beautiful, things we think that are attractive, pleasant things, and we don't have the right mindfulness, we constantly increase our sensual desire. So whenever there's an object or a person or some kind of idea or notion in our mind or a viewpoint in our mind that we think is pleasant and attractive, and we don't have mindfulness to see what we are actually doing, we are just careless and sort of just indulge in those objects or the company of those persons or thoughts about that particular thing in our mind. As long as we just sort of indulge in this without mindfulness, we strengthen our craving, we strengthen our desire. And so obviously this hindrance of sensual desire will just increase because there are so many pleasant objects that we come in contact with every day. And if we are not mindful, then each and every single time we can and we will increase this hindrance. So it is very easy to actually increase this hindrance when we are not mindful. So the sign of the beautiful is what causes sensual desire to grow, because obviously sensual desire is connected with pleasant states. So to better understand this, these five hindrances, the Buddha has also given us a lot of similes. And in this particular sutta, we don't have any similes, so I thought that we could sort of supplement this sutta with a few similes from other suttas, because I think those similes are really beautiful and they really capture very succinctly how those hindrances work. And sometimes it's easier if we have a simile to sort of remember and properly memorize the hindrances, because then we have imagery to go with it. And it also gives us another kind of avenue to understand them, because when you have these imagery, those similes, then you can, for some people it's much easier, because sort of it provides sort of an emotional connection because of those images with the Dhamma teaching itself. And so I want to share with you a few similes from two other suttas. One is the Sangarava Sutta. This is also from the Samyutta Nikaya, 46.55. And the other is from the Maha-Asapura Sutta, which is Majjhima Nikaya number 39. And in both of these cases, the Buddha also talks about those five hindrances, and he gives two very different sets of similes for the five hindrances. But I think in both cases, those are very interesting and very evocative similes. So in the first sutta, the Sangarava Sutta, Samyutta Nikaya 46.55, compares the mind to a bowl of water. And so I think most of you will be familiar with those similes in the suttas where the mind is compared to some kind of body of water. Very often the mind is compared to a lake. And if that lake is still and clear and pure, then we can see to the bottom of that lake and we can see what's going on there. And in the same way, of course, if the mind is clear and still and pure, we can see to the bottom of the mind and understand how the mind works. And so in this sutta, the Sangarava Sutta, the Buddha compares the mind to a bowl of water. And of course, again, if that bowl of water is clear, we can see to the bottom of that bowl. But if the hindrances are present, that bowl of water is not clear. And there are various different causes why that bowl of water is not clear. And in the case of sensual desire, the Buddha says that is like a bowl of water that is mixed with dye. So with various different colors. So it's like you put dye into water, then of course the water will become tinted. And it will take the color of that particular dye instead of being like pure and clear. And I think this is the idea of this having colors in the water is very similar to some expressions that we also have in Western languages when we have sensual desire, when we feel attracted, especially if we feel like romantic attraction to somebody, then we see the world through rose-colored glasses. So everything has this rosy hue, and we don't see things in the colors that they actually are. We see things a lot more beautiful and sort of we perceive things to be a lot more attractive than they actually are. And I think many people have experienced this when they put on sunglasses, and especially sunglasses because they sometimes have like a blue tint. Then suddenly the sky that is like fairly gray normally becomes this very bright blue, and all the greenery around us becomes like really, really vivid green, and the ocean becomes really beautifully blue, and all the colors are so vivid, and we think, wow, it's so beautiful here in this location. And then we take off the sunglasses, and then we realize actually the sky is quite gray, and everything around us is sort of has a very grayish like tinge to it. But because we had those blue colored glasses on, it seemed like it was so beautiful. And in the same way with sensual desire, it distorts our perception, and we perceive things to be a lot more attractive than they actually are. So this is the simile from the Sangarava Sutta to help us understand how sensual desire works and how it sort of tweaks the mind so we can't properly see what is going on. And then there is another simile from the Maha-Asapura Sutta, which is Majjhima Nikaya number 39. And there the Buddha compares sensual desire to a debt, so to taking on a loan. And of course, when we take a loan first, then suddenly we have a lot of money that we didn't have before. So we feel very happy and we can buy a lot of stuff and we can indulge in a lot of things that we think will make us happy. And we get a lot of objects that we think are very pleasurable. But as this is a loan, eventually, obviously, we will have to pay this back. And we don't just have to pay that money back, we have to pay back with interest. So we have to pay back more than what we originally got out of it. So in the same way, when we indulge in sensual pleasures, we create a lot of obstacles in our mind. We create a lot of disturbance and hindrances in our mind. Sometimes we might even do unwholesome things in order to get those sensual pleasures. And so down the line, down the road, this will lead to a lot of suffering. So the pleasure we get in the beginning is like a loan that we have to pay back with a lot of suffering in the future, which we don't realize, obviously, at the time when we indulge in all these pleasures because it feels so nice and we don't really see how that will lead to problems in the future. But it definitely will, in the same way that a debt has to be paid back at some point in the future. And as I mentioned, it's not just the amount of pleasure you have to pay back with suffering, it's actually more suffering in the same way that there's interest on money that you take out. So all these hindrances that you cultivate in the mind will cause a lot of problems for you in the future. So in that way, sensual desire or indulging in sensual desire is like taking out a loan, according to the simile. So that was the first hindrance, sensual desire, and then the Buddha moves on to the second hindrance, which is ill will. And the Buddha says, "And what, bhikkhus, is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen ill will, and for the increase and expansion of arisen ill will? There is, bhikkhus, the sign of the repulsive. Frequently giving careless attention to it is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen ill will, and for the increase and expansion of arisen ill will." So here the Buddha says the sign of the repulsive is the nutriment for ill will. So again, we see ill will is the exact opposite of sensual desire. The sign of the repulsive means that we perceive an object or a person or a thought, a notion in our mind that we don't like, that is unpleasant to us. And of course, that can trigger all kinds of emotion, from a slight irritation to fear, to anger, to hatred, to rage, like in all levels of intensity. But all of this comes under the idea of ill will, or under the hindrance of ill will, from the smallest to the most extreme reaction. And of course, all this is triggered because we perceive something that we do not like, that is unpleasant to us, and which here is called the sign of the repulsive, because it has some feature or a characteristic that is repulsive to us. And it doesn't have to be strongly repulsive. As I mentioned, it can be just a very, very slight irritation even that if we indulge in that without mindfulness, if we don't really clearly see what we are doing, if we don't really clearly see those habit patterns in our mind that lead us down this rabbit hole of ill will and anger and so on, then even the smallest trigger can cause a big reaction and can make us sort of cultivate these unwholesome habit patterns and strengthen that hindrance in our mind. And so again, going back to those similes in those other suttas, the Buddha also had, of course, some imagery for talking about ill will. And going back to the Sangarava Sutta, where the Buddha talked about this bowl of water, or where he compared the mind to a bowl of water, he said, if there is ill will present in the mind, then this is like a bowl of water that is heated over a fire, and the whole water is bubbling and boiling. So as you can imagine, The water will be very agitated, bubbling and boiling, and so clearly you cannot see to the ground of that bowl. The bowl isn't clear and it's not calm. The water is just, very, very agitated. And what we also have here is this image of fire, of extreme heat, that is associated with ill will. And I think many people sort of can feel that if they have anger, if they have rage, if they have these kind of emotions in their body, the whole body can feel very hot. It can really feel like you yourself are boiling and bubbling and burning if that emotion is particularly intense. And it can feel like you're having a fever. Your head might be red. Your skin might be very red. If that anger, we also say that anger is boiling inside of us. Like even in Western languages, we have this kind of expression of associating heat with the idea of ill will, or with anger and rage. And so this is something we can clearly feel in our bodies. And in the Maha-Asapura-Sutta, the Buddha associates the hindrance of ill will with a disease. So with being sick, with really, really suffering. Like, unlike sensual pleasure, which seems pleasurable in the beginning and leads to suffering in the future, hatred really makes us suffer right now. Or ill will really makes us suffer right now. It's like you're sick. It's really, really an unpleasant state. And again, when we are sick, very often this is associated with fever. So again, we have this idea of heat, of hotness. And there will be a lot of pain in our body. If you experienced anger or hatred before, probably you will know that your body doesn't feel very pleasant when you have this. Your whole face might be cramped up. Your muscles might be very tense. It can feel very unpleasant. You can get headaches from too much rage. And I think it's also very commonly known that intense anger can lead to all sorts of physical and health problems. Like if people really get enraged, this can lead to heart attacks, this can lead to stroke, this can lead to high blood pressure, which leads to all sorts of health issues. So it's not just a simile, like ill will really, really leads to all kinds of diseases in the body if we habitually cultivate this. So that is the simile or the hindrance of ill will. And then we move on to the third hindrance, which is sloth and torpor, or laziness and sleepiness. And here the Buddha says, and what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen sloth and torpor, and for the increase and expansion of arisen sloth and torpor? There are bhikkhus, discontent, lethargy, lazy stretching, drowsiness after meals, sluggishness of mind. Frequently giving careless attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen sloth and torpor, and for the increase and expansion of arisen sloth and torpor. So here the Buddha says, if you feel very lazy and sleepy, quite often, what is the cause for that? How did you feed into this? And the Buddha says, well, if you just lie around the whole day, if you're really lazy, if you eat too much, and then because you eat too much, you really have to lie down again after the meal, and your mind is very foggy. And if you don't properly use your mind, if you just spend the whole day sort of in a daze, you don't really like activate your mind, you just let it be in this kind of foggy state the whole day. For example, if you like to procrastinate a lot, if you can't really bring yourself to do anything useful and just waste away the whole time, then these kind of habits will feed into your hindrance of sloth and torpor. So for people who like to lie around in bed the whole day, bad news. If you cultivate this, this is really a hindrance, and if it would just lead to you having even less energy later on, it will lead to your daily life being a lot more difficult because you don't have the energy to even do the most basic things and to get your life organized, but also it will really impact your meditation practice because you would just be too tired and you just really don't have the energy in the mind to get anything done or to focus on your meditation object. So in meditation, we don't try to make the mind just necessarily peaceful the whole time. The mind still has to have a certain level of energy to be wakeful and to be able to discern things properly. There is such a thing as the mind being too calm and too peaceful if it is associated with like a foggy mind state where you're not very clear, where you're just feeling very, very sleepy. We're not looking for that kind of calm in meditation. We're looking for the kind of calm where you're really awake, where you're very clear and bright, but still very calm and very peaceful. So if you experience this hindrance of laziness and sleepiness, don't mistake that for a deep stage of samadhi. Be very clear that this is a hindrance, and what you need to do is really arouse your energy and sort of, even if the mind becomes a little less calm, then at least it becomes awake and bright, and then you can go into the right direction and calm it down again while being awake and clear-minded and clear-headed. So don't mistake this hindrance for a deep stage of meditation. And then again, we have the similes, and the first simile of the bowl of water. The Buddha says, having a lot of laziness and sleepiness, or sloth and torpor in your mind, is like a bowl of water that is covered with water plants and algae. So on the top of that water, there is just this slimy layer that is very like, very sluggish and very thick, sort of goo of water plants, algae, and you can't see through that. You don't know what is below. So even below that, the water might be very clear and very pure, but you can't get through that thick layer. You can't see through that. And if you have, let's say, a bowl that has water plants and algae on the top, it would actually be quite easy to just scoop that out and to have a clear, still bowl of water and make use of that water underneath. But because you're so lazy and so sleepy, you can't even bring up that little bit of energy that is necessary to scoop away those water plants and algae. So those water plants and algae are really a big hindrance for you because you don't have that energy. Even though your mind might be very clear and pure underneath, you can't make use of that clarity and that purity because that little bit of energy that would be required to get through that top layer is lacking. So that is the one simile. And then in the Maha-Asapura Sutta, the Buddha compares this hindrance of laziness and sleepiness, or sloth and torpor, to a prison. So if you are in a prison, obviously you will spend most of your time sort of in a tiny little cell. You have no freedom to go anywhere. You have no freedom to do what you actually want to do. The only thing that you see the whole day is like a tiny space with 4 gray walls and nothing much else to occupy your mind. And so in the same way, if you have a lot of sloth and torpor, you're just in this fog, in this gray fog the whole time. Your mind has no freedom to move. You're not able to do the things that you actually want to do. In the same way that in a prison, you can't do the things that you actually want to do because the mind doesn't have the energy to move to that place where you actually want to be, to whatever, cultivate wholesome mind states or to do any kind of action because you're just too lazy to get started. In the same way, in a prison, it's just impossible to move out of this tiny space that you're trapped in. And in the same way, laziness and sleepiness really traps you in this kind of state of low energy. So that is the illustration or the simile for the third hindrance. And then the fourth hindrance, restlessness and remorse. And the Buddha says the following. And what, bhikkhus, is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen restlessness and remorse, and for the increase and expansion of arisen restlessness and remorse? There is, bhikkhus, unsettledness of mind, frequently giving careless attention to it, is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen restlessness and remorse, and for the increase and expansion of arisen restlessness and remorse. So here the Buddha says, well, if your mind is very unsettled, then that would just feed into restlessness and remorse. So if your mind is very agitated, if you're trying to do a million things at the same time, if you're all over the place, if you can't properly focus on one thing because you're trying to focus on many thousands of different things. Also, if your life is very busy, if you're just trying to do too many things at the same time, if your day only has 24 hours, but you have a very long list of things that you really want to accomplish, if you're constantly overexerting yourself, if you're pushing yourself too much, if you're very stressed out, then all these are things that will feed into this hindrance of restlessness, especially if you're not able to remain mindful all the time, so you don't really see what is going on and you just sort of habitually react to all this restlessness in the mind with even more restlessness. Then obviously when you sit down for your meditation practice, the mind will still be jumping around like crazy and will not be able to settle and to focus on anything. And interestingly, what we also see included in this hindrance is remorse. So remorse obviously is when we regret something that we have done in the past. If we have done something wrong, maybe we've done something unskillful, maybe we've hurt another person, maybe we have broken some of the precepts, we have harmed somebody, we have stolen something, we've said something hurtful. I think most of the time is something that we have said without enough mindfulness, something we have said harshly, or maybe even a lie, or something that has hurt another person. All this can lead to remorse, and if we have a remorse in the mind, then obviously the mind cannot settle down, is very restless. It always goes back to that incident and keeps on ruminating on the things that we did wrong, and keeps on wishing that we had done things differently, and keeps on wishing that we could change the past, which we cannot, obviously. So for that reason, remorse is included under this hindrance of restlessness. And for that reason also, this shows us how important it is that our ethical conduct is pure. And this shows us why sila, or ethical conduct, is so foundational on the path, and why sila, very, very strong and very pure sila, is required in order to develop deeper stages of samadhi. Because if we don't have good sila, then we keep on planting these seeds of unwholesome karma, and we keep on sort of stirring up our mind with all the remorse that we experience. And so the mind is incapable of settling down. We just keep on feeding into this hindrance of restlessness. And for that reason, at the very least, keeping 5 precepts very, very purely is sort of a prerequisite for development of the higher stages on the Buddhist path. So not killing another being, not harming another being, not stealing, not lying, not engaging in any kind of sexual misconduct, and not sort of using alcohol and intoxicants that make our mind even more cloudy and even more foggy and even more restless. All these are very necessary foundations, because if we don't have that, then this hindrance of restlessness and remorse will just keep on being strengthened more and more, and we have no hope of ever developing deeper stages of samadhi. So, and then of course, the Buddha has again given us some similes for this hindrance of restlessness and remorse. And the Buddha says this is as though a bowl of water were stirred by the wind, and then it would be rippling, swirling, and churned into wavelets. So the whole water is very, very agitated. It's rippling, it's swirling, there are a lot of wavelets, and the wind is just constantly sort of blowing on the water and just stirring it up more and more and more. And obviously, in that case, also the water is not clear, and you cannot see to the bottom of that bowl. And in the same way, it's like a storm raging in our mind the whole time, and just churning up our mind and just swirling everything around. And usually we can't even think straight at that point. We can't even think clearly, much less sort of quieten down our mind so that we can go into deeper stages of meditation. And then the other simile that the Buddha gives us for this hindrance is that he compares this restlessness and remorse to slavery. So in slavery, obviously, you also you can't make your own decisions. There's somebody else who's controlling you. You have to work a lot. You have no time to rest. Usually that person will not let you rest. They will just send you around the whole time. You have to do a million different tasks. You have, as I mentioned, you have to work a lot. And in the same way, this is what happens to the mind when you have a lot of restlessness. You don't let your mind rest. You just let it do a million different things. And none of that is actually beneficial to your mind. In the same way that the work that a slave has to do is not actually beneficial to the slave, is someone else who derives the benefit from that work. In the same way, all this running around that the mind does when it's restless is also in no way beneficial to the mind. For that reason, the Buddha has compared restlessness to this slavery, and it's like we're basically enslaving our own mind, and we are forcing our mind to do all this really fruitless stuff, all these like fruitless works, or thinking all these fruitless thoughts, or in our daily life just rushing around doing a million different things that maybe aren't all that important. So that is the fourth hindrance, and now we move on to the fifth hindrance. And here the Buddha says, and what, bhikkhus, is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen doubt and for the increase and expansion of arisen doubt? There are, bhikkhus, things that are the basis for doubt. Frequently giving careless attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen doubt and for the increase and expansion of arisen doubt. So this maybe isn't all that clear, because the Buddha is what gives rise to doubt? Well, things that are the basis for doubt. So it's kind of like a circular statement. So what are the things that are the basis for doubt? And we have already talked about it a little bit in the beginning. Well, this isn't just any kind of doubt about anything in your life. This is specific to Buddhist practice. So maybe your meditation isn't going as well as you like. So you think about, well, maybe I'm incapable of doing meditation, or maybe I'm using the wrong meditation object, or I'm using the wrong method, or I have the wrong teacher, or my family is sort of blocking my progress because they keep on disturbing me. Or maybe the Buddha wasn't enlightened, or maybe the suttas aren't preserved properly, and the real teachings were lost in the, course of history at some point. So we have all these thoughts, and these thoughts constantly undermine our commitment to practice. And if we don't have faith in what we are doing, obviously we will not make a proper commitment. We will not give all our energy into this. We will not give all our effort into this. We won't really want to practice, because we always in the back of our mind, we question, is this really a good use of my time? And am I doing the right thing? And so if we have all this doubt and we keep on reflecting on all these questions, we just feed into doubt, and our practice sort of becomes weaker and weaker. And obviously, there is a place for evaluating one's own practice and one's own progress. So in other suttas, the Buddha also said it's good to from time to time check, am I making progress on the path? Do my wholesome states increase? Do my unwholesome states decline? And obviously, we need to evaluate that from time to time, because if you're not making any kind of progress, clearly there's something wrong, and clearly then we should make a change, and we should maybe find a good teacher or a spiritual companion and discuss with them and get some input and try to see if we can change something. So there is a place for evaluation, but when it becomes excessive and it just undermines our practice, then this is doubt, and this is a hindrance, and then this is in no way helpful and wholesome for us. So, well, that is the hindrance of doubt. And again, we have similes for this. And the Buddha says, having doubt in the mind is like a ball of water that is turbid, that is unsettled and muddy, and that is placed in the dark. So, of course, just in the same way that a ball of water is dark and muddy, you cannot see anything. In the same way, doubt will undermine your mind, and it will sort of darken the mind with all these unwholesome states. Like when we go deeper into samadhi, what we usually experience is the mind becoming brighter and clearer. And doubt directly counteracts this and doesn't allow the mind to brighten up. For example, if we feel very inspired, if we have a lot of joy in the practice, we can feel how our body becomes very light, how our mind becomes very light, and it feels like there's a brightness inside of us. And this doubt directly counteracts this kind of development. And so it doesn't allow us to bring up the joy and bring up the lightness that we could otherwise experience in our practice. So for that reason, it's like a bowl of water that is very muddy and that is placed in the dark. And in the Maha-Asapura Sutta, the Buddha compares doubt with a road across the desert. So when we're going through a desert, obviously it's very difficult to find water. It is very hot. It is very unpleasant. And there's always the chance that we would not survive, that there's always this danger of death. And so in the same way, this is like when we practice with doubt in our mind, there's always the chance that our practice will just die off completely and we will not keep on practicing at all. And it's very difficult to find water in a desert. So in the same way, it's very difficult to find inspiration in the practice. So in other suttas, the Buddha says that this joy and this happiness in practice, it wells up from inside us like a spring or like a well that just like water welling up from a spring or welling up from a lake or something. But we don't let that joy well up. So joy is usually compared to water, and that is flowing through our body, flowing through our mind if we are inspired in the practice and if the practice goes well. But this kind of source of happiness is dried up if we have a lot of doubt, because in a desert there are no wells, there are no springs, so we cannot access all these happy mind states if we have a lot of doubt in our mind. And for that reason, this hindrance is compared to wandering through the desert. And of course, it's very, very easy to lose your way in a desert because everything looks the same. In the same way, it's very easy to lose direction in our practice if we have all this doubt, because we just don't know in which direction to go. So these are the nutriments for the 5 hindrances. And I see that time is already very advanced. So we are not going to talk about the de-nourishment of the hindrances today. So the de-nourishment obviously is all the practices that we can do to overcome the hindrances, to really practice with them well, to lessen their impact, and eventually to completely dissolve them and to make our mind pure and bright, and to be able to enter deep samadhi and to develop the higher stages and the wisdom. So all of this is what we're going to talk about in our next sutta class. But I think for today, we can finish the sutta discussion for now. And then if you have any questions or comments, then you can leave them in the chat and I will see if I can answer them. So let's have a look. Welcome to everybody who has joined in. So good to see you all. It's nice to also see that Gita is back here after such a long time. Somebody's checking in from Poland. Welcome. Nice to see you. And then Sud has a question. And they say, how does one free oneself from restlessness? Will practicing sati sampajanya while out of meditation help? Is there any particular method? So this is something we will discuss about next time. How do we overcome all the hindrances? But yes, there are definitely particular methods. And as I mentioned, it's very important how you sort of lead your entire life. Also outside of meditation, if you have an extremely busy schedule, if you are all over the place, if you're multitasking, if you're trying to do a million things at the same time, if you're just doing way too many things in your daily life, then of course you're feeding into that restlessness the entire time. So let's say you meditate half an hour a day, and during that half an hour, you're very mindful, you're not feeding into that restlessness. That is great. But then there are also 23 and a half other hours of the day. And if during this whole time you're completely mindless and you're just rushing around the whole time, then that half an hour of meditation isn't going to do much, because the majority of the day you're spending feeding into the hindrance. So it's very important also how you structure your daily life, and that is sort of conducive to Buddhist practice. It's somewhat conducive to mindfulness, and so that you're already preparing your entire life for your meditation practice, and so that your entire life is actually dedicated to Dhamma practice, not just that half hour that you might be meditating each day. So practicing sati out of meditation definitely helps a lot, because then you can catch all these unwholesome habit patterns, and you can see how you feed into that hindrance the whole time, and then you can sort of interrupt that process and stop feeding into it. If you have sort of a fairly calm mind sort of, or a fairly calm life day to day, then of course there are certain practices also that you can do in meditation to overcome this restlessness. Generally, as I mentioned, we'll talk about this one next time, but generally restlessness means you have way too much energy in the mind, so you need to do practices that will calm you down a lot. So meditation practices that have objects that are very calming. So for many people, it's very calming to focus on the breath, to just do nothing with the mind at all, just observe how the breathing goes in very quietly and slowly, and then comes back out again very quietly and slowly. And just focusing on this calming and quietening aspect of the breath can be one technique that can be very, very helpful to sort of bring that energy down, and also to ground you back into your body. And Sud also has the same question about sensual desire. How do we free ourselves from sensual desire? Again, it depends very much on your daily life. Having sati in your daily life, not indulging too much in all these sensual objects, is very important. And then, of course, in meditation practice, there are various contemplations that we can do to overcome sensual desire. We will talk about this a lot more next time. One of these things is doing asubha practices, so seeing things like contemplating aspects in things that are not beautiful. So asubha means non-beautiful. So when there's something that you see that you feel is very attractive, you really investigate that object, and then you specifically note all the things that are really imperfect or non-beautiful about that thing. Let's say you're very, very sort of attracted to ice cream, then you will focus on this, and you will see, oh, it's actually very cold, and it's not that pleasant, and it's so full of sugar, and it's really unhealthy, and the consistency is somehow squishy, and it's not really all that nice. So that is kind of how you could practice with that. Or if it's a person that you're very attracted to, you can reflect whether or not they have maybe some faults also. So this is how briefly we practice with those desires. And then Rahul Ovad says, could you please briefly explain how to skillfully gradually practice with the first precept? It seems sometimes quite difficult to sensibly minimize killing of living beings. Looks like much wisdom is needed. Yeah, so this might be a gradual training for some. So, and of course there are different layers. So the first important thing is really trying not to kill any being. And again, this has a lot to do with mindfulness. It has a lot to do with intention. Depending on people's situation, that might look different for different people. People who live in cities, for them it's usually much easier than people who live out in the countryside, because in the countryside you have a lot of bugs and a lot of insects all around you, so you need a lot more mindfulness. And sometimes that might mean that you have to make changes to your house, for example, setting up fly screens in your windows and stuff to make sure that those insects don't get inside. If you feel that it's uncomfortable to have them inside your house, you might need to buy some organic, liquids for example, tea tree oil, because most insects don't like tea tree oil, so you can spray that around so that they would go away. So there are different methods that you can use to first of all try not to kill them. Then of course you also try not to harm them. So it's very easy to harm other beings without actually killing them. So that would be a next step, how we can practice. Some people go even further, they become vegetarian. Some people go further and become vegan. So there is a gradual sort of training, and not everybody sort of goes to the same depth with the practice of this precept, but at the baseline, really trying not to kill beings and being willing to make also the lifestyle changes that might require is sort of the most important with this first precept. So as I mentioned, maybe setting up fly screens, using different products to keep insects out and things like that. And of course, this is a sort of training precept, so don't expect yourself to be perfect from the beginning. Probably if this is something that you struggle with, then you will make mistakes. From time to time, you might still harm and kill various beings. So whenever that happens, just notice it and, try to do better next time. And don't give up just because maybe you feel like you failed one time or something. So I see quite a few comments have popped up. Mostly people saying thank you. Gita says she's very busy. Okay. I hope, well, it's nice that you could join in today. It's very nice seeing you. So it seems that was actually the last question. So then we can finish for today. Next week, it's very likely that there will not be a talk because I am traveling. So I will see you all again in 2 weeks' time. And then we will finish this sutta and talk about, as I mentioned, how to overcome all these hindrances and what are good practices to do to sort of dissolve all these hindrances. And for now, we will end with 3 sadhus. Feel free to join if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So have a good week. Of course, have a good rest of the day. And I will see you all in 2 weeks. Take care.